The first thing my wolf gave me was a direction. Not a face, not a name, not even a scent I could chase. Only a direction north by northeast, roughly, which in the geography of Valdemar meant one of 4 kingdoms, 11 border territories, or the long stretch of mountain villages that technically belonged to no sovereign and historically answered to none. My wolf stirred on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of the winter solstice, 7 days after my 32nd birthday, and the sensation was nothing like the old stories. No bolt of lightning. No sudden, blinding certainty. It was more like a door, somewhere deep inside my chest, developing a hairline crack for the first time, a suggestion of light at the threshold, faint enough that I almost attributed it to the wine from the night before. I did not attribute it to the wine. I had been king long enough to trust my wolf on the rare occasions he spoke, and the crack did not close by morning. I sent riders within the week. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say I sent riders. I do not mean I mentioned to my head steward that it might be worth inquiring, at some point, whether there were suitable women of good character in the Eastern Territories. I mean I convened my senior council, outlined the situation with the bluntness that 3 years of sole rule had made habitual in me, explained that my wolf had given me a direction and that I intended to follow it, and dispatched 7 separate delegations, 1 for each significant court within the compass bearing, and 3 more for the mountain territories, which required a different kind of envoy. Men who could ride rough ground, men who spoke the Highland dialects, men who would not mistake a quiet woman for an insignificant one simply because she was not dressed in silk. That last instruction I gave personally. My senior councilman, a man named Vethric who had served my father before me, and who wore the permanent expression of someone who has seen everything and approved of perhaps a third of it, listened to the full briefing and then said, "The bond did not give you a name." "No." "Or a face?" "No." "Only a direction?" "North by northeast, yes." Vethric was quiet for a moment in the way that men of his experience are quiet, not processing, but assembling. "And your wolf has not spoken again since?" "Not in the 3 weeks since the solstice, no." He nodded slowly in the way that communicated neither agreement nor disagreement, but rather the careful suspension of both. "Then we will be methodical," he said, and moved on to the next item on the briefing list. That was the beginning of the search, and I want to be clear that I was not embarrassed by it. A king who receives a direction from his wolf and ignores it is a fool of a particular and irreversible kind. The mate bond is not a suggestion. It is not a preference. It is the oldest acknowledgement in the wolf blood lineage that something exists in the world which is yours, and which you are its, and that the universe has arranged itself with some care around that fact. A king who dismisses that because the messenger didn't include a name is simply a king who will spend the next 40 years increasingly certain that something fundamental is wrong, without ever being able to name what it is. I was not going to be that king. The riders went out in the 2nd week of the new year. They were back in staggered waves by early spring, and what they brought me was methodical, as Vethric had promised, a careful accounting of every woman within the compass bearing who was of appropriate age, unattached, and willing to be considered. Some had sent letters, 2 had sent portraits, 1 had sent a delegation of her own, which I found admirable and which my wolf found entirely uninteresting, which was answer enough. I received them all. I was courteous. I was thorough. I sat across from 17 women over the course of 4 months, each one of them accomplished, each one of them dignified, each one of them possessing every quality that the world understood to belong on a list titled Qualities of a Good Queen. My wolf said nothing, not a flicker, not a breath. The crack in the door did not widen by a single fraction of an inch. By summer, Vethric had begun to look at me with something that was not quite concern and not quite resignation, but occupied the uncomfortable territory between them. I let him look. I knew what I was doing. I was waiting. My wolf had spoken once and I believed him, which meant the woman existed and was findable, which meant I was going to find her eventually if I kept looking with enough discipline and enough patience and enough willingness to extend the search further than was comfortable. I sent more riders, this time further. Southwest this time because the Northwest had been thoroughly covered, and I was not a man who revisited covered ground without reason. Southwest meant the coast territories, the fishing holds, the three small kingdoms that were technically allied to Valdemar and practically independent of everyone. My wolf had said north by northeast, and the southwest was a philosophical stretch. But I told myself the bone direction of a mate bond was not cartography, and gave the riders their instructions. They returned with nothing useful. I spent the third winter of the search doing what kings do when they cannot solve the thing that matters most. I governed. I adjudicated land disputes and water rights and the ongoing, apparently eternal disagreement between the eastern and western wool merchants about tariff structures. I received ambassadors. I attended the pack's solstice rites. I sat at the head of my great hall every evening as the custom required, at the long table of dark oak that had seated the kings of Valdemar for 6 generations, and I ate what was put in front of me and drank what was poured for me and maintained, I am told, an expression of composed authority that none of my council could find fault with. My wolf was silent. The crack in the door neither widened nor closed. 3 years of that, 3 years of a door that was not open and not shut but simply, persistently, slightly ajar, is a specific kind of weight. Not unbearable, but present. You learn to carry it the way you learn to carry a scar. It no longer surprises you, but you are always aware of it. The woman who poured my wine on those evenings was named Seraphil. I know that now. I did not know it then, which is the particular humiliation that I have had time, in the 3 years since, to make a kind of peace with. She had come to the hall in the early autumn of the first year of the search, brought in with a group of refugees from a border village called Tenmore's Rest that had been burned in a territorial dispute with the Eastern Highlands. The dispute had since been resolved, with a firmness that I will not describe in detail, but that the Eastern Highland lords appeared to find persuasive. The village was being rebuilt. The refugees had, for the most part, returned when it was safe to do so. Seraphil had not returned. My head steward, a practical woman named Orthen who had managed the domestic operations of Valdemar's great hall for 11 years, and who had an instinct for useful people that I had long since learned to trust without question, had offered her a position on the hall staff before she could be reassigned by the Refugee Coordination Office. Seraphil had accepted. She had been working in the hall ever since. Quiet, steady, present. She was not invisible. That is the thing I keep coming back to, even now, when I am trying to understand how 3 years went the way they did. She was not invisible. I simply did not look. The great hall of Valdemar seats at a formal dinner 140 people, and the serving staff on an ordinary evening numbers between 18 and 24, depending on the scope of the occasion. I am a king. I sit at the head of the table. The staff moves. Things arrive and are removed. Wine is poured. I was, in those 3 years of the search, occupied with the searching. She poured my wine. She cleared my plate. She brought the evening's document case when Orthen indicated that I had taken to reviewing correspondence after the formal dinner, which was true, and which I had not thought to communicate directly to the staff, and which Seraphil had apparently noted and accommodated with such quiet efficiency that I had simply assumed Orthen had arranged it. Orthen, when I asked her about this later, looked at me for a moment and then said, "That was Seraphil, my king. I believe she noticed you reading in the garden in the mornings and thought you might appreciate it." She paused. "She has been doing it for about 14 months. 14 months. I had been grateful, in the abstract way you are grateful for small efficiencies, for 14 months, and had not once thought to investigate who was responsible. That is the measure of how thoroughly I did not look. There are things I know now that I did not know then, and I want to set them down in order, because the order matters. Not the order in which the events occurred, the order in which I came to understand what had been occurring. The first thing I know now, my wolf was not silent during those 3 years. He was listening. I had interpreted the silence as absence, the bond gone quiet because the mate was not near, or the direction had been imprecise, or the search had gone wrong somewhere that I could not identify. I had been wrong about all of it. My wolf was not absent. He was attending. I understand now that there is a difference between a wolf who has stopped speaking and a wolf who has ceased making noise because he is concentrating. I had never understood that distinction before, because I had never had occasion to learn it. My wolf, in the years before the bond stirred, had been a reliable and relatively forthcoming presence, not constant, but available. When he went quiet for 3 years, I assumed loss. I should have assumed attention. Here is what I reconstruct now, with the advantage of knowing how it ended. The morning after Seraphiel began leaving the document case, my wolf had gone still in a way that, at the time, I had taken for his ordinary winter dormancy. I know now it was not dormancy. It was the particular quality of stillness that a wolf enters when a scent has registered that the conscious mind has not yet caught up to. The scent does not need to be close. It does not need to be strong. It only needs to be the right one. The first winter banquet, when a delegation from the southern coast had been unpleasantly condescending to the serving staff over some minor delay with the second course. I had been occupied with the delegation, managing the diplomatic temperature at the table, and had not seen what happened near the kitchen door. I learned it from Orthan later. A member of the delegation had said something to the serving staff that Orthan described, with characteristic economy, as ill-advised. Seraphiel, who was the senior server on duty that evening, had responded, quietly, without raising her voice, in the even tone of someone who is stating a fact rather than lodging a complaint, that the Valdenmoor Hall staff operated under the customs of Valdenmoor, and that the delegation was welcome to address any concerns to the head steward, and then had moved on without waiting for a reply. The delegation member had been silent for the remainder of the evening. I had been told none of this at the time. My wolf, I now understand, had been paying close attention to everything that happened near the kitchen door. The late autumn of the second year of the search, a wounded wolf was brought into the hall. This one I was present for, because it happened at the front entrance during what had been scheduled as a border council meeting, and the interruption was significant enough to pause everything. The wolf was a young pack member, a scout who had been caught in an iron trap near the western border, which we had outlawed but which occasionally still appeared, put down by poachers who were not from Valdenmoor and did not care about Valdenmoor's laws. The scout had dragged himself most of the way home, which was both impressive and deeply alarming, and had collapsed at the hall entrance just as the border council was convening. My healer was 3 floors up in the healing room, which was the correct place for her to be, but which was not immediately helpful. The scout was bleeding. Pack wolves do not take well to being surrounded by strangers when they are injured. The defensive instinct goes up, which makes approaching them dangerous, which makes the bleeding worse, which makes the instinct worse. It is a cycle that requires someone with steadiness enough to interrupt it. Seraphiel was in the entrance hall when he was brought in. She had been passing through with linens from the laundry, which means she had no particular reason to stop. She stopped. She set the linens down at the wall. She knelt slowly without any sudden movement, at a distance from the scout that was close enough to be present but not so close as to crowd him. She did not speak at first. She was simply there, calm, unhurried, which in a room where 3 guards were hovering with their hands not quite on their weapons, and a border councilman was saying something about sending for someone immediately, was a notable quality. After a moment the scout turned his head toward her. The defensive posture eased fractionally. She began to speak then, low, steady, nothing remarkable about the words themselves. She was simply talking, maintaining the calm with her voice the way you might maintain a fire with steady wood, adding just enough and not too much. By the time my healer arrived, She had moved close enough to press her folded apron against the worst of the bleeding, and the scout's breathing had slowed from the panicked pace of a trapped animal to something closer to sleep. My healer looked at the situation and then looked at Seraphil and said, "Well done." Seraphil picked up her linens and went back to work. I had watched all of it from the doorway of the council chamber. My wolf had gone so still inside me that for a moment I had wondered if something was wrong with me, and then I had understood that the stillness was not absence. The stillness was a kind of held breath. The stillness was a wolf who had been presented with something and was taking very careful stock of it. I went back into the council chamber and ran the border meeting and did not, that evening, send for Orthan to ask about the woman who had calmed the scout. I did not know why I didn't. I attributed it, at the time, to the general pressure of the meeting and the week that followed, which was complicated. I know now what I was actually doing. I was afraid that if I looked directly at the thing, it would resolve into an ordinary explanation, and the held breath would be for nothing. That is the particular cowardice of intelligent men who have been looking too long. You start to protect the possibility of the thing rather than reaching for the thing itself. I sent 3 more delegations east that winter. My wolf said nothing. The crack in the door remained precisely as it had been. Spring came. The hall prepared for the Pax Planting Festival, which meant the eastern market yard was given over to the vendors, and the guild craftsmen and the general cheerful organized chaos that Orthan managed with the implacable efficiency of a woman who has done it many times and has opinions about every aspect of it. The great hall staff rotated out to assist with the yard operations on a rolling schedule, because the festival drew the full pack and the food service requirements were substantial. I attended the festival on the second morning. I did this every year. It was not a formal appearance. I walked the yard in my ordinary clothes without the full regalia, stopping to speak with the craftsmen and the farmers, eating what was offered with the sincerity of a man who genuinely enjoyed the festival food, which I did. It was one of the parts of the kingship that I had never needed to perform because it was simply true. The eastern yard was full. The vendors were arranged in the traditional crescent around the central space, and the pack was moving through in the easy, unhurried way of people who know they have the full day ahead of them. Children were running. The Smithy Guild had set up a demonstration forge at the far end. Someone was selling honeycakes from a cart near the north gate, and the smell of them was the smell of every planting festival I could remember going back to childhood. I was near the central fountain, speaking with the head of the Wool Guild about the tariff situation, which was, as always, the tariff situation, when I heard the horse. Not the sound of a horse walking, the sound of a horse that has been startled, that particular clatter and surge that you learn to recognize if you have spent time around horses, as the prelude to something going wrong. I turned. The draft horse belonging to the bread vendor had shied from something, I never learned precisely what. A dog, a loud noise from the forge, a shadow, and had come out of the shafts of the vendor's cart at an angle that put it directly into the central space of the yard, moving fast and wrong-footed and entirely beyond the control of the vendor, who had let go of the lead and was shouting. The horse was large. It weighed, I estimated later, perhaps 900 pounds. It was running, not with purpose but with the blind momentum of a frightened animal that had not yet found a wall to stop against. There was a child directly in its path. A pack girl, perhaps 6 years old, who had been standing at the edge of the central space eating something and had simply not yet registered what was coming. Her back was partly to the horse. The people nearest to her were moving, but not fast enough. The yard was full. The space was small. The horse was already committed to its direction. I was moving. The guards nearest to me were moving. 3 other people were moving. Seraphil was already there. I do not mean she was closer. I mean she was already committed. She had seen it before any of us, or had seen it at the same moment, and had not spent any of those instants calculating the odds the way the rest of us had. She came from the left, which was the only approach that didn't put her directly in the horse's path, and she was not running so much as moving with a particular deliberate speed that covered ground without the panicked quality that would have made the horse worse. She reached the child, swept her up, and turned her body into the deflecting angle, the positioning you use when you cannot fully stop something but can redirect the impact, and the horse's shoulder caught her instead of the child. She went down hard, the child did not. The horse ran another 20 feet and stopped against the vendor's remaining cart, breathing hard and finally too tired to go further. 2 of my guards reached it and got the lead secured. The yard had gone silent in the way of a crowd that has witnessed something that needed a moment to be understood. I was already crossing the space. I do not remember deciding to cross it. I remember being at the fountain, and then I remember being at her side, and the crossing in between is gone from my memory, which tells me something about the state I was in. She was sitting up. She had not lost consciousness, which I would have been grateful for under any circumstances, but the gratitude I felt was not the ordinary, impersonal kind. The child was still in her arms, not out of Seraphal's grip but not frightened either, the way small children are sometimes calmer than the adults around them because they have not fully processed the alternative. Seraphal was breathing with the controlled steadiness of someone who is deciding whether pain is a crisis or merely a fact, and had apparently concluded it was a fact. Her left wrist was bleeding, a scrape from the cobblestones, shallow but long, the kind that looks worse than it is but looks, in the first moment, quite bad. And on that wrist, and on mine, I realized, with a sensation that I can only describe as the door I had been carrying for 3 years coming open all at once, the mark was burning. Not metaphorically, not as a manner of speaking. The mate mark of the Valdenmoor line had existed in the lore as a thing that happened, and that I had, in the abstract, believed, the way you believe in things that are real but distant, until the moment they are not distant at all. It burned at my wrist, a pattern of silver-gold light along the skin, warm and entirely real, and at hers simultaneously, and every wolf in the eastern market yard, guard and vendor and guild member and pack farmer alike, dropped to one knee. Every single one of them, without a word exchanged, without signal or order. They simply knew what they were witnessing. My wolf was not silent. My wolf, for the first time in 3 years, was not silent. He did not surge or howl or do any of the dramatic things the old stories attributed to him. He did something quieter and more absolute. He settled, like a man who has been standing at a window for years finally hearing the door open, like something that had been held in the forward lean of anticipation finally allowed to breathe out and back. 3 years of that hairline crack, that held breath, that door neither open nor shut, and what it felt like when it finally moved was not an explosion. It was simply relief, the most complete relief I have ever experienced, the kind that makes you understand, retroactively, exactly how much had been absent. She was looking at the mark on her wrist. Then she looked up at me. I have tried, in the time since, to find the words for her face in that moment. I have not found them. She had dark eyes that were steady in a way I had not seen before in a person who had just been knocked to the ground by a horse, and something in her expression was not quite surprise. It was more the look of a person who has been holding a question for a long time and has just been given the answer, and the answer is what they had quietly, without telling anyone, been hoping for. She said, "The child is all right." And I said, "Yes, are you?" She said, "I think so." I said, "Good." And then I said, because the mark was burning and the yard was on its knees, and I had spent 3 years riding every compass bearing except the one that led to my own hall, and because there was no version of this moment in which I was going to let it pass in any way that was not entirely clear. "Your name." She looked at me for a moment. "Seraphal." "Seraphal." I said it wants to have the shape of it in my mouth, because a name you have waited for without knowing you were waiting for it deserves that. How long have you been here? 3 years, she said. I pour your wine. I am told that this produced an expression on my face that several members of my court later described, with varying degrees of diplomacy, as remarkable. I do not know what the expression was. I know what I felt, which was something between the profound comedy of the situation and the most complete astonishment of my life, and I know that neither of those things was what I wanted her to see in that moment. What I wanted her to see was simpler. I took my cloak. I was wearing my ordinary working cloak, the gray one, not the ceremonial, because it had been a market morning, and I settled it around her shoulders, because the cobblestones were cold, and she was sitting on them, and the apology for 3 years of not looking would take considerably longer to communicate than a cloak, but a cloak was something I could do right now. Then I offered her my hand. She looked at the hand, then at the mark on her wrist, which was still burning softly, and at the matching one on mine. Then she took my hand. Her grip was steady and direct. The way everything about her was apparently steady and direct, and I pulled her up from the cobblestones with the care I would have given to something irreplaceable, which she was. The child she had been holding transferred itself without complaint to a guard who happened to be nearby and looked trustworthy. Seraphiel stood. Vetherick was at my shoulder. He had come across the yard with the rest of them, and his expression was the one he wore when he had assembled a situation completely and was waiting to see what I would do with it. I looked at him. He looked at the marks on both our wrists. Then he looked at me. "The bond has declared itself," I said, not to him but to the yard, because the yard needed to hear it. My voice carries. I have practiced this. Every wolf in the eastern market yard was still on one knee. The crowd that was not wolf blood had gone still in the respectful, somewhat stunned way of people who understand they are watching something significant. Before this court, before this pack, before the mark that is the oldest law of Valdenmoor, this is my mate. This is your Luna. Seraphiel at my side said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, so that only I could hear her, "I haven't agreed to that yet." I looked at her. "I was going to," she said, and the tone of it was the dry composure of someone who is making a point, not a complaint. "I simply thought you should know there was agreement involved, rather than declaration." I was quiet for a moment, processing this. My wolf found it entirely correct. I found it, I will be honest, both chastening and the single most wonderful thing I had heard in 3 years of searching. "You're right," I said. "I should have asked." "Yes," she said. "Will you," I said, "be my mate? Be Luna of Valdenmoor? I am aware we have not spoken before, not genuinely, and I understand that is largely my failing, and I intend to remedy it at considerable length if you'll permit me. But I am also aware that the mark is on both our wrists, and that my wolf has been waiting 3 years to exhale, and I would like, if you're willing, to begin." She was quiet for a moment that seemed to me much longer than it was, the way such moments do. Then she said, "Yes." I put my arm around her carefully, because she had just been knocked down by a 900-pound horse, and I was aware of my priorities. And I looked out at the yard and at the pack kneeling in it and at Vetherick, whose expression had arrived somewhere I had not seen it go before, the territory of quiet, unreserved approval. The senior delegation from the southern coast, who happened to be visiting for trade negotiations, and who had been in the yard for the festival at my invitation, were standing at the periphery in a small baffled cluster. They had been to Valdenmoor twice in the past year to propose a political match with some cousin or other of the southern governor's household, and Vetherick had been managing their expectations with the careful diplomacy of a man who knows something they don't. They looked at the marks. They looked at the kneeling yard. They looked at Seraphiel, who was wearing my cloak and holding the hand of the Alpha King of Valdenmoor, and meeting their gaze with the perfect composure of a woman who has been in this hall for 3 years and knows exactly where everything is. The head of the southern delegation said nothing. There was, as it turned out, nothing that could usefully be said. The bread vendor recovered his horse. The Guild Forge went back to its work. The honeycakes continued to be sold. The planting festival of Valdenmoor proceeded, in the way of all the best festivals, with the story of the morning folded into it and made part of it, so that people who were there that day could say for the rest of their lives that they had been present in the eastern yard, the morning the Luna was named, that they had seen the marks burn, that they had gone to their knees and known without being told. I walked back through the yard with Seraphil at my side, because there were things that needed attending to. She needed the healer's attention, and the child's family needed to be spoken with, and the horse needed to be checked for injury, and the vendor's cart was in pieces. And because the festival was still going and the pack was still there, and the Alpha King does not abandon the festival on the second morning no matter what has occurred, and because I found, now that I had found her, that I did not want to be anywhere she was not. She walked with the same steady, unhurried quality I had apparently been watching for 3 years without registering. She accepted the healer's attention with the matter-of-fact patience of someone who has been hurt before and knows how to let people help. She said something to the child's mother that made the woman burst into tears of the grateful kind, which is its own skill. While the healer was wrapping her wrist, she said to me, "How far did you actually send the riders?" "Southwest," I said, "eventually." "Southwest," she appeared to consider this, "and northeast." "Northeast first. That was the direction the bond gave me." "Tenmoor's Rest is northeast of Valdenmoor," she said, thoughtfully. "The village I came from." "Yes," I said, "I know that now." She looked at the wrapped wrist. "The bond gave you the right direction." "The bond gave me the right direction," I agreed. "And then I sent riders north by northeast for 8 months, and then I sent them further, and then I sent them in other directions entirely, and I never thought to look inside the hall I was sitting in." She was quiet for a moment. The healer, who had been pretending very hard not to listen, was also quiet. "3 years," Seraphil said. "3 years. I was here the whole time." "You were here the whole time." Another pause. Then, with the dry composure that I was beginning to understand was the particular flavor of her humor, "And the wine, was it satisfactory?" "The wine," I said, "was always excellent. I realize now that this is not unrelated." She almost smiled, not quite. The almost smile was, I would come to understand, a whole vocabulary. She used it for things that were genuinely funny but that she felt deserved a more measured response than a full smile would imply. I would spend the next several years learning to read it. I did not mind this. The festival continued into the afternoon. Orthan found me at midday with the expression of a woman who had known something for some time and had simply been waiting for the relevant parties to catch up. "She's a very good worker," Orthan said. "Exceptional, actually. I've been hoping she'd stay." "She's staying," I said. "Good," said Orthan, and went back to managing the catering for the afternoon portion of the festival. Vethric found me an hour later. He said the southern delegation would like a word. I imagined they would. "Shall I tell them you're unavailable this afternoon?" "Tell them I'm available tomorrow morning. And tell them that the matter they came to discuss has been resolved, and that they are welcome to attend the festival for the remainder of the day as guests." He was quiet for a moment. "That's gracious." "The bond has declared itself," I said. "I can afford to be gracious." He left. I went to find Seraphil, who was back at the festival because she had finished with the healer and apparently saw no reason not to be. And I spent the afternoon learning what 3 years of not looking had cost me and beginning to make up the deficit. Here is what I discovered. She had grown up in Tenmoor's Rest, which was a farming village of the modest, prosperous kind, not wealthy, not struggling, simply solid, the way farming villages that have been in the same location for several generations tend to be. Her father had been a shepherd. Her mother had kept the village accounts, which accounted, I thought, for the precision Seraphil brought to everything. She noticed details and remembered numbers, and had opinions about the organization of things that were informed and practical and occasionally exactly correct when I had been wrong. She had come to Valdenmore's Hall after the burning with nothing except the clothes she was wearing, and the habit of usefulness that had made Orthan's instinct fire immediately upon meeting her. She had been working for 3 years. She had sent money back to the village as it was being rebuilt. She had opinions about the kitchen garden that she had apparently been sharing with the kitchen garden staff for some time, which explained why the kitchen garden had been doing better than I could account for. She had a very clear sense of what she thought, and said it when asked and occasionally when not asked, but never for the sake of speaking, only when the thing was true. She told me she had known, somewhere in the back of her mind, that something was different about Valdenmore. She had not attributed it to the bond. She was not wolf blood and had not expected to be relevant to pack matters, and certainly had not expected to be relevant to the pack's king. But she had stayed when the other refugees returned. She had not been able to fully explain why at the time. She had told herself it was practical. The hall position was good work and the village was still being rebuilt, and this was true. It had also been, she thought, something else. Something in the hall that she had not been able to leave. My wolf was paying attention, I told her. I know that now, she said. Were you? No, I said. I'm sorry. She was quiet for a moment in the assessing way she had. You're sorry you didn't look. Yes. But you were looking, she said. You sent 7 delegations in the first month. I sent them everywhere except where you were. Yes, she said. But I think that's the kind of thing that happens to people who are looking very hard for something. They look right past it. She was watching the festival, not me, with the calm attention she brought to everything. I've done it with the kitchen garden more than once. You're so busy searching the far end of the bed that you miss what's come up right beside your foot. I thought about this. That's a reasonable way to frame 3 years of expensive diplomatic expeditions. I thought so, she said. I found Vethric that evening, and told him to write to the Rider Corps with thanks and to stand them down. He wrote 2 letters, one to the riders, and one, which I read over his shoulder, to the Southern delegation, which was a masterwork of diplomatic courtesy that managed to convey, with warmth and grace, the information that the Alpha King of Valdenmore had found his mate that morning in his own hall, and that all existing negotiations on the subject of political alliance through marriage were therefore concluded, and that he hoped they enjoyed the remainder of the festival, and trusted the trade discussions tomorrow would be productive. That last part, I said, the trade discussions, will still be productive, Vethric said. The mate situation is resolved. The wool tariff is not. Fair point, I said. He sealed the letter. Then he looked at me with the expression of a man who has served a king for many years and has been waiting with patience for certain things to come right. She's good, he said. The woman. Yes. Been here 3 years. Yes. You should have looked. I know. I'm not reproaching you, he said, in the tone of a man who was mildly reproaching me. I'm noting it for the record so that when you are insufferable about finding her, as you will be, I can point out that she was here the whole time. I'm going to be insufferable. You've been silent for 3 years, he said. Yes, you're going to be insufferable. He picked up the letters. Deservedly. That evening there was a dinner, not a formal one, not the long table with the full court, but the kind that happens after a significant day when people need to be fed, and the kitchen has been working all afternoon anyway. Seraphil was not at the serving end of it. Orthan had quietly rearranged the staff schedule. Seraphil sat beside me at the end of the family table, in the seat that had been empty since my mother died 12 years ago, and my wolf was so thoroughly settled that the quiet inside me felt like a different thing than the quiet of the 3 years before, not absence, not the held breath, but simply the clean, uncomplicated peace of a man who is exactly where he belongs. She ate the festival food with the frank enjoyment of someone who had been working all day and was genuinely hungry. She had opinions about the spicing of the soup, which she did not volunteer until I asked, and when she gave them, they were correct. She told me about the kitchen garden in more detail than I had ever been told about the kitchen garden, and I found, to my own surprise, that I was interested. Not because I am a man with particular investment in garden management, but because she had a way of talking about what she observed that made the observation itself more interesting than you would have thought possible. She asked me about the search. Not tactfully, not as though she was being careful with me, but with the direct curiosity of someone who genuinely wanted to understand the shape of it. I told her. I told her about the 7 delegations and the 17 women and the southwest coast and the compass bearing that had been right all along. She listened the way she seemed to do everything, steadily, completely, without the half-attention of a person who is composing their response while you are still speaking. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That must have been very frustrating." "Yes," I said. "I think," she said thoughtfully, "that if the bond had given you a face instead of a direction, you would have found me immediately and it would have been simpler, but you would have walked into it without knowing anything about what you were walking into. The direction made you search, and the searching made you," she paused, looking for the right word. "Desperate," I suggested. "Ready," she said. "I think it made you ready." She looked at the mark on her wrist, which had settled from the burning bright of the morning to a softer warmth, the kind that you feel without seeing, a permanent temperature just above the ordinary. And I think 3 years in this hall made me ready. I knew where the document cases went. I knew the pack. I knew Orthan. I knew the shape of things here, so that when it came I wasn't coming into somewhere foreign. I was all ready. She stopped. "Home," I said. "Home," she agreed. The candle on the table burned low while we talked. Orthan came through at some point and replaced it without interrupting anything, and went away again with the particular grace of a head steward who has just witnessed something she approves of and knows better than to comment on. The hall settled into the comfortable, quieter sounds of an evening after a full day. Somewhere in the city the festival was still going, lanterns lit, the planting songs being sung in the traditional way, voices rising and falling in the warm spring air. She was still here, sitting beside me, and my wolf was still settled, and the door that had been cracked for 3 years was open. I told her, somewhere in the second hour of the evening, that I intended to be thorough about the remedying I had mentioned in the yard. She looked at me sideways with the almost smile. I told her I was serious. She said she believed me. I said I was also aware that we had known each other, genuinely, for approximately 9 hours, and that she was under no obligation to accommodate any pace except her own, and that I would spend whatever time she needed and however it needed to be spent, because we had apparently been in the same building for 3 years already, and I was not in a hurry anymore. "You were in a hurry this morning," she said. "In the yard." "In the yard I had just watched you get knocked down by a horse," I said. "I was not going to be measured about it." "No," she said, "I didn't think you would be." The almost smile again, and then quieter. "I wasn't going to say no." "I know. But it mattered that you asked." "I know that too," I said. "I'm sorry it took me a moment to understand it." She looked at me for a long time, in the way she had looked at me in the yard, the look of someone who has had a question for a while and has received the answer. "You're going to be a decent king," she said. "About most things." "High praise," I said. "It's the highest I have," she said, "for now." Outside the festival went on. My wolf was quiet, and the quiet was the right kind. The mark on my wrist was warm. "In the morning," I began. "What I mean by that is not a single thing. It is a collection of mornings, spreading out from the one in the Eastern Market Yard into the weeks and months that followed. Mornings where I asked her about what she had noticed the day before, because she noticed things I had missed, and I found I did not want to miss them anymore. Mornings where she told me the truth about small things, the kitchen garden, the new hall hire who was not managing well, the drainage problem in the East Corridor that the stone workers had been inconsistent about, with the directness of someone who does not shade the truth because it seems easier. Mornings where I showed her things about Valdenmoor that were mine to show, and where she learned them with the same thoroughness she brought to everything, so that when she had opinions about them, which she did, the opinions were informed. There was a council meeting, 3 weeks after the yard, at which Vetherick presented the formal matter of the Luna designation for the senior council's record. This was administrative rather than decisive. The bond had declared itself in the open yard, before witnesses, which under Valdenmoor's oldest law was declaration enough. But Vetherick was a man who believed that things which happened informally in courtyards should also be documented formally in records, and I agreed with him. The senior council, 6 of them, assembled in the small chamber with the high windows. Seraphil attended. She sat at the council table as though she had sat at council tables before, which she had not, with the composed attention she brought everywhere. When she was asked to speak to her understanding of what the Luna's role entailed, this was procedural, not a test, and everyone in the room knew it. She spoke briefly, precisely, and with the particular quality of having thought about this before and arrived at a position she was prepared to defend if necessary. The senior council's recorder wrote it down. Vetherick looked at me once, briefly, with the expression of a man who has served a king for many years, and has occasionally wondered whether the king would make something other than sensible decisions. The expression suggested he had provisionally concluded sensible decisions were being made. The political match delegation, to their credit, had stayed for the trade discussions the following day, and reached a perfectly good agreement on coastal tariffs that had nothing to do with marriage and a great deal to do with fish. Valdenmoor's wool, their ports. It was workable, and Seraphil, who had been present because I had asked her to start attending the trade discussions when she was willing, and she had said she was willing, made one observation about the distribution route at the end of the second session that the delegation's own trade secretary wrote down and appeared to be genuinely considering. Vetherick on the way out said to me quietly, "Where did she work before the hall?" "Her mother kept the village accounts," I said. He nodded. "I thought it was something like that." Summer came, the hall ran. The pack had something to say about the Luna who had been in their hall for 3 years without their knowing, and what they had to say was mostly warm. The pack has a long memory for small kindnesses, and the scout whose bleeding she had slowed while waiting for the healer had told the story several times, and the family of the child from the festival had told the story several times, and these stories, in the way of pack stories, had spread and accumulated the texture that good stories acquire in the telling. She had been here, she had been doing good. The bond had known before any of us did. There was a ceremony, properly in the late summer, the formal Luna designation, conducted in the great hall before the full pack. This is the rite that has been conducted in Valdenmoor's hall since the 6th generation of the line, and it is not a short one, and it requires the Alpha King to stand at the front of the hall and affirm, in the formal language of the rite, the bond and the choosing, while the pack witnesses. I had practiced this rite in the abstract years ago, as part of the general preparation for kingship, without expecting to use it particularly soon. Standing at the front of the hall, with Seraphil beside me and the full pack arranged in the rows that the rite required, I used the formal language and found that it was, in this case, entirely accurate, every word of it exactly true, which is not always the case with formal language but which is, when it happens, its own kind of gift. At the end of the rite, which concludes with the Alpha King placing his hands over the Lunas and stating the bond before the assembled pack, I said the words and felt my wolf, still settled, still breathing easy, acknowledge them. Not with noise, with the warm, steady sureness of a creature that has found exactly what it was always supposed to find and knows it and is at rest. Seraphil said her part of the rite in the clear, direct voice she used for things she meant. The hall went quiet the way a hall does when it knows it is witnessing something real. Afterward, in the smaller anteroom, while the pack gathered in the hall for the celebration, she said, "The formal language is very thorough." "It is," I agreed. "Some of those promises are significant." "Yes." "You did make them voluntarily." "I did." She looked at me with the assessing quiet. "Good," she said, "so did I." That was 3 years ago now, that afternoon in the Eastern Market Yard. The document case still appears each evening, placed with the quiet efficiency that has characterized everything she does, though it is now placed by the junior hall staff because Seraphiel is no longer the one managing the evening service. She manages considerably more than that, with the thoroughness and precision that Orthan, who is not easily impressed, will occasionally describe in my hearing as the most efficient transfer of domestic management responsibility she has ever witnessed, and who is clearly very pleased about it. The kitchen garden is exceptional. I am told this by everyone who has any opinion about kitchen gardens, which is more people than I would have expected. Seraphiel had, it turns out, been quietly correct about the drainage and the companion planting and the rotation schedule for 3 years, and had been implementing improvements at the margins of her authority as a hall server, which had been limited, and is now implementing them at the full scope of her authority, which is not. Vethric, who said he was not reproaching me, and then reproached me gently once or twice in the weeks after the yard, has said nothing about the matter since. He manages his records with the same meticulous care. He attends the council meetings. He has, on more than one occasion, agreed with something Seraphiel has said before I had finished processing whether I agreed with it, which is a thing I have decided to find genuinely amusing rather than complicated. The bond is what I said it was that day in the yard, complete, not in the sense that it is finished, but in the sense that nothing is missing from it. The mark on my wrist is the same temperature it was the morning after the festival. It has been 3 years of that warmth, and I have not become accustomed to it, which is to say, I still notice it every morning with the same clean, uncomplicated gladness, and I do not expect this to change. I asked her once, in the 2nd year, what she had thought in those 3 years in the hall. Not about me specifically, about why she had stayed, what the thing had been that she couldn't name. She was quiet for a moment. "I told myself it was the job," she said. "The village was still being rebuilt, the hall position was good, those things were true." She looked at the window. "But I think, and I couldn't have said this then because I didn't have language for it, I think I felt like I was where I was supposed to be, not in a dramatic way, in a very ordinary, quiet way, like sitting down in a chair that fits." She paused. I didn't know what it meant. I just knew I wasn't supposed to leave. My wolf had known. He had been paying attention for 3 years to the right thing, and I had been paying attention, very expensively and comprehensively, to everything else. This is the particular instruction I received from those 3 years, and I have not forgotten it. Pay attention to the right thing. It sounds simple. It is not always simple, but it is the most important thing. She is pouring her own tea now, in our rooms in the West Tower, on the morning I am writing this account, not the formal document that Vethric will want eventually, but the one I am keeping for myself, because there are things that should be written down, and the manner in which you missed your mate for 3 years while she poured your wine in your own hall is, I think, one of them. The mark on her wrist catches the morning light. She is reading something. She has an opinion about it. I can tell by the line between her brows, which is the expression that precedes a statement she has decided is worth making. In a moment she will say it. I will listen. The wolf will be settled, and the door will be open, and outside the hall the pack of Valdenmoor will be going about the ordinary productive business of its morning. She looks up and finds me watching. "You're not writing," she says. "No," I said. "I am paying attention to the right thing." The almost smile, and then the full one. "That is enough."